Hey everyone! Today, we're going to tell you an amazing story about a famous doctor named Alvaro Villalobos. His life took a dramatic turn after he was brain dead for 55 minutes. It was during this time that Alvaro had a deep near-death experience that changed his life and gave him a picture of the future of all people. What's even more interesting is that this revelation has a lot to do with our world. You definitely won't want to miss this exciting story full of surprising turns and deep insights. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to our channel and hit that bell so you don't miss any of our new videos. Let's dive into the amazing story of Alvaro Villalobos.
A lot of people knew me as one of Spain's best cardiologists for a long time. My name is Alvaro Villalobos. I was in charge of 7 areas at the Virgen del Rocío Hospital in Seville, where I worked. My life was a marathon of hospital hallways, operating rooms, and talks that never ended. Being the first person to arrive and the last person to leave, surrounded by the best medical staff, made me feel good. I learned a lot of technical terms because I was so interested in numbers, statistics, and processes. I bragged that I could figure out what was wrong with anyone's heart in minutes. My method was quick, accurate, and based on a relentless drive for medical greatness. But life does surprise us sometimes, doesn't it? Who would have thought that I, the great Dr. Villalobos, who often walks the line between life and death, would soon be on the other side? If you had asked me a few years ago if I believed in life after death, out-of-body experiences, or anything else not of this world, I would have laughed and said you should get a neurological test. My world was ruled by reasoning, science, and things I could touch. Things I couldn't see, touch, or measure didn't exist in my world. But now I'm here, ready to tell a story that makes me question everything I thought I knew. There's more to this story than just a near-death experience. It's about how that experience threw me from my safe and logical road into a deep well of uncertainty. I had to face my biggest fears and find a new reason to live because of it. Allow me to take you on a journey that started on a normal day in Seville and took me far beyond what I thought was possible. This trip not only changed my life, but it also changed the way I think about life itself. It was just another day when it began. Like always, I got to the hospital at 6:30 a.m. with 2 cups of strong coffee in hand. As part of my job, I had to quickly check out the different offices and the brand new tools in the cardiac catheterization laboratory, which was about to open. At least that's what I thought. Everything looked healthy and in order. I was at the top of my game professionally, working on a big project that would put our hospital at the top of Europe for heart treatments. It was a lot of pressure, but I loved it. Or maybe looking back, it was eating me up. In the morning, I had a meeting with my helper, Javier. We came into my office at 7 a.m. and started talking about the last few details of our big project. It was 7:05 when I last checked the time. Suddenly, I had a flashback to a dream I had the night before. This was a strange event. I was in the exact same place in my dream, talking to Javier at my desk. In the dream, I would get up and walk to the black bookcase in the corner of the room. There, I would die. I shook my head to get rid of the strange thought. There was work to be done, so I didn't have time for charms. I couldn't explain it, but I kept having the feeling of déjà vu. Even though I was trying to focus on the numbers and graphs in front of me, my eyes kept going to that black bookcase as if it were calling me. I gave up at 7:15. As I walked toward the bookshelf, I cut Javier off in the middle of a phrase and said, "Just a moment. I don't know what I thought I would find. Maybe I was just trying to show that the dream wasn't important." Then it took place. After only 2 steps, I felt a sharp burning pain in my chest, like someone had stabbed me. I couldn't see clearly, and my legs gave way. I heard Javier's voice calling my name, but it was far away, like it was from another world. At the very moment I hit the ground and everything went dark, I had one last thought. So this is how it ends. I still can't explain what happened next. How do you describe an event that is hard to understand? I was no longer in my office in an instant. Though it was a place, it was more of a state of being. The lack of pain was the first thing I noticed. I no longer felt pain in my chest. Instead, I felt incredibly light, like the world's weight had been taken off my shoulders. I then became aware that I was floating, some 5 feet above the office floor. I could see my still moving body lying below. Javier was right next to me, pleading for help. As soon as people got into the office, they started trying to revive the person. The scene was strange. It was like I was watching my own death from above, like I was in a movie. The weirdest thing was that I wasn't scared. I felt a deep, overwhelming sense of peace. There was no fear or worry, just a deep peace that I can't explain. As I watched, I noticed something strange about my body below. One half of it was completely dark, almost like it could be touched, and the other half gave off a bright, almost glaring light. It looked like 2 different forces were trying to take control of my body. At that very moment, I felt someone there. I didn't see anyone, but I felt like something or someone was all around me. Being held by pure love and understanding was like being hugged. It was more of a thought than a voice that told me, "You're okay, don't worry." All the stress, worries, and responsibilities I had been carrying just disappeared. I felt completely at peace for the first time, or maybe ever. I wished I could stay in that state of complete peace forever. Then, though, things started to change. It looked like I was being pulled away from the scene below me. All of a sudden, I was moving quickly through a tunnel of colors and light, and I couldn't quite put my feelings into words. I heard my name being called while I was on this trip. It started out as a soft whisper, but it got louder and more insistent. "Alvaro, Alvaro." I didn't want to answer because I wanted to keep going on this amazing journey. That being said, the voice got stronger, pulling me back with a rush of air in my lungs and a huge pain in my chest. When I opened my eyes, I was back in my body and in the world of the living. I felt very sad about being alive for the first time. It's not like waking up from a normal sleep when you wake up after a near-death experience. It's more like being yanked out of a beautiful dream and thrown back into a harsh, uncomfortable world. The first thing I felt was pain, a burning ache in my chest that was so bad I wanted to scream but couldn't. My eyes got used to bright lights and worried faces. I was in the ICU and hooked up to a bunch of machines that buzzed and beeped. I heard people shouting with joy, "He's back!" Wow, what a miracle. But all I could think about was why they had brought me back. I felt like the peace I had felt like a long-ago memory. In its place was the hard reality of my hurt body and jumbled mind. Over time, I learned that I had a major cardiac arrest and had been brain dead for 55 minutes. Even with 17 shocks, chest compressions, and the defibrillator, nothing worked. At that point, a doctor who wasn't even meant to be in the hospital that day suggested the last and most desperate thing that could be done: opening my chest in the office to try to revive my heart by hand. They had no other choices, so they came up with this crazy idea. With the help of a thoracic surgeon, they did the surgery and, amazingly, were able to get my heart beating again by pressing on it by hand. I should have been thankful because they did everything they could to get me back. Instead, I felt very angry and upset. How could I tell them that I didn't want to go back because the place I had been was so much better than anything this world had to offer? The next few days were a blur of tests, trips to the doctor, and trying to get better. I was getting better physically. The doctors were shocked that despite how bad my situation was, there was no brain damage or other major effects that they could see. But I was in a lot of emotional and mental turmoil. After going through something so deep, how could I go back to my old life? I had seen something out of this world. So how could I focus on medical records and surgeries? I thought about things I had never thought about before, like, what is life? What does death mean? What's the point of all this? As a doctor, I had always only thought about what could be seen and measured, dodging questions about the meaning of life. My family and coworkers saw the change and thought it was because of the stress I had been through. They said, "He needs time." I knew it was more than that, though. Something deep inside me had changed, and I couldn't go back. I tried going back to work and getting back into my schedule, but everything felt empty and pointless. Things that used to drive me, like professional recognition, moving up in my job, and material success, didn't seem important anymore. I understood that I couldn't just go back to my old life. Things that happened to me shouldn't be ignored or forgotten. They were a call to something bigger and a chance for deep change. So while my heart was still healing and my mind was full of questions, I set out on a journey to find myself. Everything I thought I knew about life, death, and the point of being here would be put to the test on this trip. In the months after my near-death experience, I was having a hard time with myself. On one hand, there was the logical doctor who had been taught to only believe in scientific facts and proof. On the other hand, there was this new part of me that had seen something that couldn't be explained by science. I wanted to tell others about what happened to me, but I was afraid that doing so would make them think I was crazy. At that point, a doctor who wasn't even meant to be at the hospital that day suggested the last and most desperate thing that could be done: opening my chest in the office to try to revive my heart by hand. They had no other choice but to go with this crazy idea. They did the surgery with the help of a thoracic surgeon and miraculously were able to start my heart beating again by pressing on it by hand. I should have been thankful because they did everything they could to get me back. It was instead a huge pile of anger. How could I tell them that I didn't want to go back, and that where I had been was better than anything this world had to offer? The days that followed were a blur of tests, trips to the doctor, and efforts to get better. I was getting better physically. The doctors were shocked that, despite how bad my situation was, there was no brain damage or other major effects. But I was going through a lot of mental and spiritual turmoil. After going through something so deep, how could I go back to my old life? How could I pay attention to surgery reports and medical reports when I had seen something so out of this world? I thought about things I had never thought about before, like, what is life? What does death mean? What's the point of all this? I had always focused on the real and measurable as a doctor, ignoring big questions about life. My family and co-workers saw the change and thought it was because of the stress I had been through. They said, "He needs time." But I knew it was more than that. Something deep inside me had changed, and I couldn't go back to being the person I used to be. I tried to get back to work in my normal schedule, but everything felt empty and pointless. Things that used to drive me, like getting professional praise, moving up in my work, and getting things, now seemed like small goals. I understood that I couldn't go back to my old life. Things that happened to me shouldn't be ignored or forgotten. They were a call to something bigger and a chance for deep change. So while my heart was still healing and my mind was full of questions, I set out on a journey to find myself again. Everything I thought I knew about life, death, and being made changed when I went on this trip. In the months after my near-death experience, I was having a hard time with myself. On one side was the logical doctor, who had been taught to only believe in scientific facts and proof. On the other side was a new part of me that had seen something that science couldn't explain. I wanted to talk about what happened to me, but I was afraid that people would think I was crazy if I did. There I was in his office, and I remember that my hand was shaking as I spoke. "Miguel," I stated, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen without judging." And I let the words flow freely for the first time. I talked about everything, how I felt like I was leaving my body, the light, the loving presence, and the peace that words can't describe. I talked about how this experience had changed how I thought about life and death and how hard it was for me to understand how this fit with what I had learned as a medical student. Miguel didn't say a word while I talked. His eyes were moist with tears. He got up, walked over to me, and gave me a hug when I was done. "Alvaro," said he, "you are not alone, and what you experienced is real." During that moment, I felt like a big weight was taken off my shoulders. At last, someone got it. I could finally start to understand what had happened. Miguel pushed me to be more honest about what I was going through. "There are many people who need to hear this," he stated. "Your story can bring comfort and hope to those who fear death." Over time, I started telling my story, first to my family and then to a few patients and finally on radio and TV shows. Every time I spoke, I felt like I was respecting the experience I had and the new part of my life I was learning about. Of course, not everyone had a good reaction. Some coworkers looked at me with doubt, while others were worried. Villalobos has lost his mind, I heard people say in the hospital hallways. He needs a break from all the stress. But for every person who didn't believe, my story touched someone else. People who were dying found comfort, families who were grieving found hope, and people who didn't believe in God started to question their own views. I realized that talking about my experience wasn't just making me feel better. It was also a way to start deeper talks about life, death, and what might come after. Maybe, just maybe, there was a bigger reason why I was brought back for the first time since I got back. I became aware that a deep change was taking place inside me. Things like professional rank, material possessions, and praise that seemed so important at the time now seemed so small in comparison to what I had been through. My whole set of values had changed. Relationships became more important to me than accomplishments, kindness over competition, and spiritual growth over financial gains. This change naturally made a lot of things in my life more difficult. My coworkers noticed that I wasn't as competitive or focused on moving up in my job at work. I began to spend more time with patients, listening to their stories and giving them comfort in ways other than medical care. When I changed how I did things, some people said I became a more caring doctor, while others thought it meant I was losing my edge. Around the house, things got hard in my relationship with Clara. Her happiness at seeing me around more and spending more time with her and our kids was mixed. However, she found it hard to understand this new me that was so different from the man she had married. I started to doubt a lot of the decisions I had made in my life. The big house, the expensive cars, and the fancy trips all seemed pointless and empty. I suggested to Clara that we move to a smaller house, give away some of our things, and live a simpler life. At first, she said no because she was worried about our family's finances. As I looked for answers, I looked into different spiritual paths. I began to meditate, read about Eastern ideas, and go to spirituality-focused conversation groups. This investigation made things worse with Clara, who was a devout Catholic and didn't trust my new spiritual quest. I struggled with a deep sense of unfulfilled meaning during this time. I thought there was a reason I was brought back, but I wasn't sure what it was. I felt restless all the time, and it made me question everything in my life. During this time, I started having vivid dreams and visions that seemed to tell me the future. In one dream, I was talking to a big group of people about love, kindness, and how reality works. In another, I was helping people who were very poor and in pain. These thoughts and visions made me even more sure that something big needed to change. I couldn't keep acting like nothing had changed and living the same way I did before. It shocked everyone around me when I chose to quit my job at the hospital and get a divorce from Clara. It was the hardest choice I'd ever had to make, and it hurt a lot of people I cared about. But I knew I had to be true to the change I was going through. I lost almost everything I had built up in my life in the months that followed. There was damage to my work reputation, and I lost my home and a lot of my things. I felt like a failure in the eyes of everyone when I moved back in with my parents. It was the most difficult time of my life. There were times when I wondered if I had made a huge mistake by throwing away everything for something that might have been a dream. In order to get back to the peaceful state I had felt during my near-death experience, I even thought about committing suicide. But something inside me wouldn't let me give up. It was the same voice that had told me everything would be okay during my experience, and it now told me to keep going because it thought there was a reason for everything. As the pieces of my old life fell apart, I started to put it back together, but not based on what other people thought or on my old beliefs, but on something deeper that had touched me during my near-death experience. I wasn't sure where this new road would lead, but I felt like I was being true to myself for the first time in a long time. I realized this was the first thing I needed to do to find out what my second chance at life was really for. I had to start over after losing almost everything I used to think was important. It scared me and freed me at the same time. For the first time in decades, I didn't have a clear plan, a set job path, or a social stance to uphold. There was only me, my life experience, and a strong feeling that I needed to do something else with it. I began working as a counselor at a Christian shelter for the homeless during this time. It wasn't something I had planned. I saw a poster asking for help while wandering around the city one day. There was something that made me want to help. The work I did at the shelter was very different from anything else I had done. I was used to working with high-tech medical tools and complicated procedures. Now I had to serve soup, hand out blankets, and most importantly, listen to sad life stories. At first, I felt totally out of place and wondered what a former top heart doctor could do to help people who had lost everything. But over time, I understood that my own loss and change made me connect with them in a way that no one else could. I started telling some of the people in the shelter my story. I talked about how I had died and come back, and how that had changed how I saw life. To my surprise, a lot of them really connected with this idea of dying and being born again. There was one man in particular who left a big impact on me. I made Juan cry when I told him about my experience. Juan used to be an executive but lost everything because of drinking. He told me, "Doctor, I also died and came back." It wasn't the same for me as it was for you, but when I hit rock bottom and chose to change my life, it felt like I was born again. These talks made me understand that having a near-death experience wasn't the only way to die and come back to life. A lot of people go through metaphorical deaths, which are times of deep loss, extreme change, and intense transformation. As I do, they fight to find meaning and purpose in their lives afterward. At the shelter, I started setting up conversation groups where people could share their own stories of dying and coming back to life. People who had lost everything could find new meaning in their lives in these groups, which became places where they could heal and find hope. I had a big realization during one of these meetings. "Doctor, maybe your mission is to help people like us, who have nothing left, find a new beginning just like you are doing," a 24-year-old drug addict told me. That answer changed everything. Those words hit me like a bolt of lightning. All of a sudden, it all made sense. My near-death experience, the loss of everything I valued afterward, and my search for a new purpose had all prepared me to help others through their own life-changing events. The unfortunate thing is that the young man who told me this died the next night of an overdose. His death really shook me up, but it also made me more determined. I saw that there were a lot of people who needed help, lost souls who were looking for new points of view in their lives. From that point on, I gave this work my full attention. I started to study psychology and therapy to combine what I knew about medicine with a broader view of healing. Drawing on what I learned during my near-death experience, I created a rehabilitation program with physical, mental, and spiritual parts. The work was hard and often made me feel emotionally drained. There were times when I wasn't sure if I was really making a difference. But then I would see someone whose eyes had lost hope light up again, or hear someone say they had finally found a reason to live, and I knew I was on the right track. Over time, my life started to have a new purpose. It wasn't the life I had pictured or worked so hard to achieve as a doctor, but it was a life with meaning, real relationships, and progress all the time. From the ashes of my old life came a new one that was meant to help other people find light in the dark, hope in sorrow, and a fresh start after their own life-changing events. It was a job that made me happy in a way that my last job never had. I thought this had always been my purpose, and my near-death experience was just the way I got there. However, I had found my new purpose. As I worked hard to help people find meaning after events that changed their lives, I began to notice something strange. When I came close to dying, it was like a new way of seeing things opened up for me. As time went on, I had vivid dreams and visions that seemed to tell me what would happen. At first, I tried to ignore them by saying they were just stress or an overactive mind, but it got harder and harder to deny that something strange was going on. When I dreamed about an old coworker from work that I hadn't talked to in years, it was one of the first things that made me question myself. He was trying to save a patient's life in the operating room of his dream. I found out the next morning that this coworker had died of a heart attack during a difficult surgery. These kinds of accidents started to happen all the time, which was scary. I had insight about the people I worked with at the shelter, and I often knew things about their lives that they hadn't told me yet. Several times I felt like I had to go to certain places right away, and every time I did, I found someone who badly needed help. At first, these new skills scared me. As a scientist, it was upsetting to deal with things that didn't make sense from a scientific point of view. Being open to this new part of my life, though, made me understand I could use it to help people around me even more. I learned to believe these feelings and intuitions and use them in my counseling. Many times, a word or picture that came to me during a lesson was just what the person needed to hear. In the middle of a group practice one day, I had a very clear vision. I saw the world going through a big change. Cities were in chaos, power systems were falling apart, and people were becoming more spiritual and looking for meaning. The end of the 2024 Olympics in Paris was at the center of this vision. I saw it as a turning point, a symbolic moment that marked the start of a new era. I couldn't ignore the vision because it was so clear and real. I started to talk about it with some close friends and patients at the shelter. To my surprise, a lot of them said they had had similar dreams or intuitions. One of the homeless people, a guy who was known as the prophet for often predicting the future, looked at me with wide eyes when I told him about my vision. He told the doctor, "I've been telling you this for years, but no one has believed me. The Great Awakening is coming, as you saw." I got chills when I heard those words. I understood that what I was going through wasn't a one-time thing, but a part of a bigger movement, a shift in the way people think that was just starting. I started to learn more about historical prophecies, visions, and mystical events. I found interesting trends and reports from mystics and seers from different cultures who talked about how the world would change at the start of the 21st century. At the same time, I noticed small changes in the world around me. More people seemed to be questioning the status quo and looking for more meaning in their lives. Ideas that were once thought to be not scientific were being accepted by science. At the same time, faith and the search for transcendent experiences were becoming more popular, especially among younger people. All of this led me to a shocking conclusion. My near-death experience wasn't just about me. It was a glimpse into something much bigger. A shift in the way people think about themselves that was about to happen. I understood that my job wasn't just to help people find meaning in their lives. I also had to help them get ready for this big change. I started to talk about this vision in my work, both when I talked about healing and transformation on a personal level, and when I talked about getting ready for a coming world change. Not everyone agreed with these ideas. Many people thought I was crazy. A doctor who used to be respected but had gone crazy after a terrible event. But for every doubter, there were also people who really got this message. I didn't just see myself as a therapist or counselor. I saw myself as a messenger chosen to help usher in a new era. This was a job I had never imagined for myself before, but I was fully committed to it. As 2024 got closer, I felt a stronger need to act quickly. I knew we had to be ready for what was coming because the world was changing so quickly. As the year and the Paris Olympics got closer, I stopped just helping people get over their pain and started getting ready for the big changes that seemed to be coming. My main goal now is to get as many people ready as I can for the big change that is coming. In the past few months, I've put in more work. I've started giving talks at community centers, churches, and even some colleges that are willing to listen to me in addition to my work at the shelter. My message stays the same. Big changes are coming, and we need to get ready, not just mentally and physically, but also emotionally. A lot of people want to know what will happen. To be honest, I don't know everything. My visions give me more feelings and impressions than exact events. I do know that this change will have a huge effect on how we see the world and how we interact with each other. I stress how important it is to learn to care about others, have sensitivity, and connect more deeply with the world around us. I teach people how to meditate and be more aware, which I think are important skills for getting through the rough times that are coming. Asking people, if you knew the world was about to change drastically, what would really matter to you, is another thing I like to do. Why would you do something different? Not everyone agrees with this statement. Some people think I'm crazy or a con artist who is playing on people's fears of the end of the world, while others say I'm making people worry for no reason. But for every doubter, there are people who really get what I'm saying. A young woman recently came up to me with tears in her eyes after we had talked. She told the doctor, "I've had dreams about a big change for years, but have never been brave enough to tell you about them. Hearing you today made me feel like I'm not crazy or alone." Moments like these remind me why I keep going, even though I have questions and skepticism. I'm sure I'm connecting with something real, something a lot of people feel but don't want to admit. As I finish up the day by getting ready for bed, I feel a deep, relaxing sense of peace as I look out at the stars. In fact, it's the same feeling I had when I was very close to dying. I keep thinking that one day everyone will have an experience like that in their everyday lives. I'll be back at it tomorrow, spreading my word and getting people ready for what's coming up. But right now I'm just thankful. I smile as I go to sleep, knowing that every day brings us closer to this big change. I'm thankful for this chance I've been given to see what's to come. What's really cool is how the people around me have changed. People are now more open to ideas than ever before. People who used to think spirituality was silly are now looking into deep experiences, and scientists who used to be skeptical are beginning to think about options they used to think were crazy. Things have changed at the shelter where I work. People who live there and have been through a lot are now talking about their goals for the future. A lot of them have dreams and visions that are like mine. It feels like everyone is waking up at the same time. During a group meeting yesterday, an old woman who didn't say much got up and said, "It's coming. The veil is coming off. We're all going to look." After that, there was a strong silence. How exactly is this change going to look? Are we ready for this? I remember how peaceful and loved I felt during my near-death experience. If what's coming is like that, then maybe there's nothing to be afraid of. But changes aren't always easy. I don't know what will happen in the days, weeks, or months to come, but I do know that things will change. Today is the start of a new age. I'm taking a deep breath and smiling because I know I'm where I'm supposed to be and doing what I should be doing. There are fewer and fewer things that can happen in this world, but a new one is about to start. I'm excited for what's next. What do you think about this thrilling trip? Let us know what you think in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell to make sure you never miss an update. Let people know that life is full of more than meets the eye.